And just another, Nathaniel directed the camp. And next weekend, Nathaniel's getting ordained at West Hills campus. And so we're really excited for him. I'll tell him that you clapped for him. He's a great, great guy. And just want you to be aware of that. The service, we're going to video it and we're going to throw it up on the website early in the week, hopefully. But if you're able to get out to West Hills next Sunday to be a part of that, if you want to, you're welcome to do that. And I want to let you know, because you guys give, so many amazing things are happening. I got to go to RPI last night, Rock Point Intercultural. And that's like the coolest thing I've done forever. It was amazing to be there and to see the diversity of the people that gathered, to see God at work in the lives of people. And after church, they had supper and got to stay and eat great Filipino food. And it was just so good, prepared by brand new volunteers to the church. And then I went they've got a food bank there. And it is like legit. It is massive, the amount of food that's been donated and given. And I bet there was at least 15, maybe 20 families that were given some grocery bags and able to load stuff up to go home. And I just thought, this is beautiful. This is what the church is supposed to look like. Meeting people's needs in the name of Jesus. It was just, and because your faithfulness, your generosity, many of you volunteer and help, and God is moving at RPI. And it was just a really, really great experience. And I was thinking just about the things in life that bring us joy. So for me, Camp Camisal is really special. You see the lives and the faces of these kids and serving, doing dishes, cleaning washrooms, but experiencing the joy of Christ. And there's so many other things that bring us joy. When you fall in love for the first time, or when you finish school, when you get that job that you really wanted to get, when you buy your first condo, or you make a certain sports team that you weren't sure, you're kind of on the bubble whether you'd make it or not. When you have kids, when your kids leave home, there's all these moments that bring us great, great joy. And then they come back. And anyways, joy is something that we long for in life. And yet often it seems really elusive for many of us, if we're being really honest. Maybe you've heard the parable of the little girl. Parents are driving home. They've been out for the day and it's supper time, and mom and dad are talking about what they're going to make for supper when they get home. And this little girl from the back seat, she pipes up that she thinks that they should get a Happy Meal for supper from McDonald's. And, that magical combination of food and a toy that some, brilliant marketer created. And then she goes, "Can I please have a Happy Meal?" She asked her parents. "I must have it. I don't think that I could live without it." And her parents, they smiled kindly and they foolishly attempted to reason with her. Ever tried to reason with a toddler? No, sweetheart, that toy is just a silly little thing that will quickly find its way into the garbage in the landfill. And it only serves to elevate the price of the meal to something beyond what it's truly worth. It's not in the budget. We can't do it tonight. Maybe another day. But they didn't understand. She knew that she wasn't just buying fries, a drink, McNuggets, and a little plastic toy. She was going to be buying happiness. She was convinced she had a little McVacuum in the core of her soul, and that our souls are restless until they find rest in a Happy Meal, she believed. She began her defense. Every parent knows about this. I want a Happy Meal more than I've wanted anything ever before. And if I get it, I'll never ask for anything again, ever. No more complaining, no more demanding. If you get me a Happy Meal, I'll be content for the rest of my life. Well, that sounded like a good deal for the parents. So they jumped and they bought it. And it worked. She grew up to be a contented, joyful woman. She lived with serenity and grace. Her life in many ways was very hard. The man she married turned out to be a louse. He abandoned her with 3 small children and no money. The kids too were a disappointment. They dropped out of school. They sponged off her meager resources, ironically earned at her minimum wage at the local McDonald's, where she cleaned floors and washrooms. But she never complained because when she was 4, she had gotten the Happy Meal. Does life work this way? You would think children and parents would have caught on by now. We simply don't get the reality that the Happy Meal, apologies if you own a McDonald's franchise, the Happy Meal is a myth. It's a fraud. Yea, it's a scam. The only guy for whom Happy Meals brings happiness to is Ronald, as in McDonald. Have you ever noticed he's always smiling whenever you see a picture of him? And that is because he's sold billions of Happy Meals. But of course, only children are naive like this. Only children could be so foolish to actually believe that a change in circumstance could bring contentment. Or maybe not. Maybe as we get older, we don't necessarily get much smarter. Our Happy Meals just get more creative and expensive. You see, all day long, we are bombarded with messages that communicate that we're just a combination of appetites and desires. The purpose of all advertising is to create a sense of discontentment and to offer solutions to that discontentment. If only you bought this, ate that, drove that, lived there, looked like this, drank this, then your life would be great. Many people today demise the seeming lack of influence in the church, of the church in modern culture. Scholars identify a shocking rise in secularism and a decline in faith, and the seeming inability of the church to respond. What does joy look like in a Happy Meal culture? As a church, do we have something more to offer? Do others see transforming joy, profound gratitude, extravagant generosity in our stories? Here's the thing, church. We are either being shaped by the Holy Spirit to become increasingly like Jesus, or we're being discipled by a worldview that removes God from the equation of life. And if, or in some cases when we remove God from the central reality of our lives, we find ourselves caught in an unending, unrelenting, unsatisfying pursuit of joy that proves to be tragically insufficient when facing the realities of life. I believe deeply that the primary goal of the enemy of soul wellness is not to cause us to sin greatly, but rather to tempt us to redefine primary passions like joy in our lives. He longs us to numb us into thinking that Happy Meals are where happiness is found. He wants us to pursue temporal happiness as a substitute for the kind of joy that Jesus came to deposit into our lives. I deeply believe that the non-believing world around us desperately needs to discover the joy of Jesus. And they'll only do it if they see that joy brilliantly manifested in our lives. I don't think 14 kids choose to trust Jesus this week at Camisol unless they saw joy in their fellow campers like the ones we had here, unless they saw joy, love, and kindness and grace in their counselors and their maintenance workers and their cooks and their directors. People need to see joyful generosity, profound gratitude in us that causes them to ask, who are you? How do you live like this? What are you about? The world's not impressed with the fact that we're in church this morning, here or West Hills or wherever else we might find ourselves today. They're not overly enamored by our religious choices, but they cannot help but be impacted by truly joyful people, truly grateful people. So here's what I'm learning in life. This is deep. You'll probably want to write this down. Get your phone out, write it in the flyleaf of your Bible. This is really, really critical for you. I've discovered recently that grumbling is not a fruit of the Spirit. I've checked multiple times. Grumbling is actually an indicator of not walking in the Spirit. Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, excuse me, actually equates grumbling along with idolatry and sexual immorality on a list of the big three sins that the Israelites struggled with. Idolatry, we get that. Sexual immorality, yeah, that sounds like not good. Grumbling, serious? It's right up there with behaving really, really poorly and worshiping other gods. It is. People are not drawn to miserable saints. You know who they're drawn to? Joyful saints, kind people, generous people. Have you ever found yourself caught in the myth of the happy meal? Looking to something or someone other than Jesus to find joy in life? Where are we searching for the kind of joy and inner contentment that makes us truly contented people? Here's my simple sermon in a sentence for the weekend. The world around us desperately needs to see the joy of Jesus in us. The world around us needs to see the joy of Jesus in the lives of those who claim to follow him. So Philippians 4, I barely need to preach it. We've already heard it read. And I'm just going to say a couple of things because the truth in this text is so profoundly deep and impactful. And it's the truth of this text that changes our lives. And I just found this little bookmarker. This was filled in by somebody in my last church on a connection card, a friendship card, whatever we call them. And this is what they wrote where you could leave a prayer request. They said, please pray for me. I deal with a lot in my life and I am scared that I won't make it and that I'll eventually take my own life. I'm scared of the church body because they haven't been so kind. Thank you. And they signed it, scared and lonely. These are some of the people that we're worshiping with this morning. Where do we find joy? Contagious joy, transforming joy, life-changing, life-impacting joy. Well, fundamentally, we find it in Jesus. We find our joy in Jesus. Verse 4, we used to sing it as a chorus. Most of us have been around church for a while, know it by memory, even though you didn't know you knew it. You do. Rejoice in the Lord always. I'll say it again. Rejoice. It's always important to read scripture in the right context. So remember where Paul was when he wrote this simple statement. He was in prison. This was no posh prison experience with basketball courts and workout rooms and televisions and games rooms. He was in likely a 4 feet by 8 foot cell that was about 4 feet high. It was cold and damp. It likely was underground with no natural light. It was awful. And it still catches me off guard every once in a while when I think that an incarcerated man, unjustly imprisoned, would be calling the church to a life of joy. But that's what Paul is doing here. The verse is critical, church, because it reminds us that our joy is not found in our circumstances. We'll see that in a moment. But rather it's found in Jesus. You know, we sometimes substitute the word joy for happiness. Happiness is based on happenings. It's circumstantial. Things are going well and life's good. Things are unraveling and life is hard. And God seems to be underperforming. He seems to be at best not strong. At worst, he appears to be not kind. Paul wanted the Philippian church, the church at the various sites in Calgary at Rock Point, to know that circumstantial experiences are a terrible substitute for eternal joy. We need the purest form of joy that we find in Jesus and in him alone. I love how Peterson translates Philippians 4:4 in the Message. Celebrate God all day, every day. I mean, revel in him. It's the last time you reveled in God. I think one of the saddest commentaries on Christians today is that we're often viewed to be a joyless, passionless people. We've been so tainted by the secular humanistic vortex in which we live and breathe that seeks to minimize God, to trivialize the sacred, to exalt temporal experience, and we're dying in the pursuit of pleasure. While we would never say it, we place divine expectations on human relationships, on material acquisitions. And honestly, we're crushed with disappointment when they fail to deliver what they promised. And then we have the audacity to question God and his character when we virtually removed him from the central role in our lives. When life doesn't make sense, church, remember that the true source of sustaining joy and where we find it, it's in Jesus. But Paul doesn't stop there. He goes on, he talks about let your gentleness be evident to all. We'll skip past that, but just think that thing through. Would people accuse us of being gentle, of being kind, of being compassionate? Is it evident to all? The gentleness that I saw displayed in that food bank last night at RPI was beautiful. Just a graciousness, welcoming people to take that which they needed. But then he gets to the second, in my talk this morning, critical reality that we find joy in Jesus. But secondly, we answer anxiety with prayer. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Church, don't let stress, don't let angst win the day. Take disappointment and loss to God in prayer. Leave these things with the one who loves us most and deepest. I read this week of a criminal who became a follower of Jesus in a former Soviet prison camp. And this is what he wrote. Among the general despair, while prisoners like myself were cursing ourselves, the camp, the authorities, while we were slicing our wrists or hanging ourselves, the Christians, often with more severe sentences, refused to succumb to despair. You could just see Jesus reflected in their faces, their pure and grateful lives, their deep and enduring devotion to God, their gentleness and courage became a shining example of real life to thousands. Are we a shining example of real life to thousands? When our lives are marked by a passion to know and serve God, when our lives are marked by an abiding sense of joy and hope and kindness, the world's impacted by us, even in the midst of trial and disappointment. We live in a culture that values comfort and ease more than knowing God and pursuing God. We believe our culture's mantra that more for me is better for me. And we pursue life with self firmly embedded at the center of our stories. The result? We find ourselves being caught up in anxious living when life inevitably goes sideways. We grumble, we complain, we demand, we question God's character, his plan, sometimes even his existence. Yet while we question, joy becomes more elusive and distant. Is there a non-anxious presence about us? Because we know the one who created us and the world around us. The one who is at work making all things good and beautiful in his time. Is life hard? Unthinkably so at times. Devastatingly so at times. Yet we are a people who have chosen to trust, to wait, to hope, to live by the Spirit. And a remarkable, sustaining, resilient capacity emerges when we do. I love the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who wrote, "All that I have seen teaches me to trust God for all that I have yet to see." Life, happiness, really is about perspective. Paul invites us to live life from a perspective of God who loves us more than we could ever dream to imagine. A God who is with us at all times. A God who intervenes even when life doesn't make sense, perhaps especially when life doesn't make sense. The power, the presence, the wisdom of God, the comfort and the kindness of God makes weak, fragile, vulnerable people strong and confident and joyful. Answer anxiety with prayer. Great peace, and I'd say great joy also, comes when we do. A peace that passes all human understanding, cannot be explained in the natural realm because it has supernatural origins and sources. The heart of these verses, someone sees, someone knows, someone cares. Never forget it. The next section of verses I'm going to skip past as well, but it's all about thinking right. It's all about focusing on good things. It's all about taking the things that are good, noble, pure, praiseworthy, trustworthy, thinking the right kind of stuff. The enemy wants to plant seeds of doubt and devastation and selfishness and self-centeredness into our hearts. But we choose to take captive the thoughts of the enemy, and we surrender ourselves fully to God, and we depend upon him, and we trust him, and we acknowledge him, and we wait on him, and we choose to believe, and we choose to trust. And we choose to hope, and beautiful things happen. But the last part is what I want to end with today. And this is the invitation for you and I, not just to rejoice in the Lord, and not just to answer anxiety with prayer, but to remember where contentment comes from. These are Paul's closing comments in his letter. He says, "I have learned to be content, no matter what my circumstance is." He writes twice in these 4 verses, 10 to 13, that he had learned to be content, literally meaning I have come to discover. Paul hadn't always known this kind of joy and resiliency and courage. Though raised in a very wealthy and privileged environment, true contentment for Paul was elusive until he met Jesus on the road to Damascus. He was learning to live independent of circumstance because he was learning to live dependent upon Jesus. Contentment is a process that results not from getting everything that we think we want or need, but rather from discovering that in Jesus we have everything that we could ever want or need. We grumble too much. We're far too ungrateful. As a society, joy and contentment seems awfully elusive to many of us. Paul's message, no matter what we think we want or need, without God, it'll never be enough. We'll always want more. We'll rarely be joyful or grateful. Robert Hughes wrote a scathing critique of our culture a few years ago in a book called The Culture of Complaint. And his thesis was this: we live in a society where people perceive themselves to be entitled to having all their desires fulfilled. We take this to be part of our birthright. We accord ourselves victim status when it doesn't happen. We live in a culture of complaint. It forms our hearts and minds. We become bored with our work. We're dissatisfied in our relationships. Even God seems to come up short for us. We escape disappointment through temporal numbing sources like television and the internet and shopping or thrill-seeking, sexual experiences, drugs, alcohol. Cynicism enters our lives. Gratitude exits. John Cheever writes that the main emotion of the average adult who's had all the advantages of wealth, education, and culture is disappointment. Happy meals just don't cut it anymore. And sometimes in this grumbling, self-absorbed culture in which you and I live, we're tempted to think if God wants me to be more joyful, then he just should give me what I want. We don't say it like that, but sometimes that's the undermining theme of our lives. Every parent listening right now knows that giving a child everything they want is a recipe for disaster. God knows that too. As we commit to providing our children with everything that they need, so God promises to meet all our needs. I saw a great bumper sticker a while ago, and it read, "Mean-spirited people raise mean-spirited kids." I just liked it. In the same way, self-absorbed people raise self-absorbed kids. Stuff doesn't make us joyful in and of itself. Learning to depend upon Jesus is what leads to contentment. To say it positively, I'd suggest that joyful people raise joyful kids. Kind people raise kind kids. Generous people raise generous kids. It's a process. It's a journey. It's an adventure. But it's the life that God has called us to. What we really learn in this text is that circumstances are not intended to be sovereign in our lives. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. We don't have to live at the mercy of our circumstances. There's a better way to live. There's a better path to follow. Christ followers are people who are learning to live life against the backdrop of eternity. They're learning to see things through the eyes of God. Perspective is critical. True joy sees that all of life is a gift from God. G.K. Chesterton once said, "Here ends another day with which I have had eyes, ears, hands, and the great world around me, and tomorrow brings another. Why am I allowed to?" Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote that all of earth is crammed with heaven. Every common bush is aflame with God. Those who see take off their shoes and worship. The rest of us sit around and pluck blackberries. Is there blackberry juice under our fingernails this morning? Or is our earth crammed with heaven? Please tell me, I said it last week, I'll say it again, that driving into the parking lot today took your breath away. The brilliant yellow of canola growing against the backdrop of mountains and smoky skies. But it's beautiful. All of earth is crammed with heaven. Every common bush is aflame with God. Oh, that we could live that way and see the world that way. You know, sometimes when people ask us, "How you doing?" We'll go, "Well, under the circumstances." God doesn't want us to live underneath our circumstances, but nor does he expect us to deny our circumstances, avoid them, medicate them, or minimize them. He wants us to live through our circumstances, to learn from them, to discover his grace, his sufficiency, his peace that passes all human understanding in the midst of them. So much of how we interpret the data of life comes from perspective. A lot of things change when perspectives change. And here's the great perspective changer. Here's the key to a non-anxious presence. Here's a key to being able to rejoice in God. Here's the very heart of the gospel, this book that we read and love and cherish and allow to speak into our lives. We need to understand that a greater source of strength is available to all of us. Verse 13 is one of the most dearly loved verses in our Bibles, and so it ought to be. Paul is acknowledging not just the source of his contentment. He's helping us discover the truth about that source. And he says simply, "I can do all things through Jesus, who gives me strength." It's not a matter of I can do some things. It's not even I can do most things. It's a strength that comes from Christ that enables us to do all things. I admittedly don't always live in the fullness of this truth. I admittedly often take things upon myself. I often look to circumstantial realities in order to find capacity and courage. But life has a way of reminding me that in Jesus I have everything that I need. And when I live that way, I just live better. I am aware that many here this morning face enormous challenges that make it really, really difficult to feel super joyful. There are challenging marriage realities. There are kids who are far from God and home. There are financial stresses and pressures. There are work stresses. There's depression. There's loneliness. There's grief. Life is never easy. And it is not always fair. But somehow, I have to believe, and I see it in this book, and I see it in my life, and I see it in your lives, that God is sovereign, that He is powerful, that He can and will make a difference in our lives when we invite Him to do so. Being joyful is not just a feeling. It's not even a choice. It's the fruit of the Spirit. It's the fruit of surrendering our lives and our circumstances to God. It's the fruit of living life in God, with God, for God. We can do all things. We can be joyful in all things. We can find peace in all things through Jesus, who gives us strength. Just like the happy meal might make a kid happy for about 17 minutes, there are no magical shortcuts to joyful life. Ultimately, joy is a God thing. It's what increasingly manifests itself when we surrender our lives fully to Him and seek to live in the fullness of the Spirit. It's the fruit of life lived with feet firmly planted on the rock. That is Jesus. Why does it matter? Because life's hard. And it's complicated. I shared last weekend about a couple of friends that have experienced paralysis when we looked at the 4 friends bringing their friend to Jesus. One of those friends was a guy named Ed. And some of you know exactly who I'm talking about. Ed was a businessman, pretty powerful, pretty strong-willed, pretty strongly involved in his church. A little bit opinionated. I know this because I was his pastor. I remember one Sunday he came up to me, and I was young and terrified, and he was older and strong and intimidating. And we had a worship team for the first time. So this is back in the early 90s when music went from a piano and an organ and a hymn book to a band and singers and words on a screen. And we had introduced the worship team for the first time this Sunday. And Ed came up to me and he goes, "Hey, is this going to be the standard fare in church on Sunday mornings?" And I gulped because his face said everything I needed to know about how he felt about it. And I said, "It won't be every week, but it's coming. This is what the future is going to look like." "Yes, sir, it is." And he goes, "I'm scheduled to become a member here in 2 weeks." And I said, "I saw your name on the list." He goes, "As a member, I speak my mind. And if I don't like something, I let the pastor know." And I said, "That doesn't surprise me, sir." And he goes, "Didn't really like it today. What do you think I should do?" With all the courage I could find in Jesus, I said, "Perhaps, sir, you should take your name off the list of coming members until you can get your head around it." And he goes, "Good advice, pastor. Take me off the list." I walked away, more terrified than I was before. He came up to me the next Sunday. We had a worship team again. And he came up to me after the service and he goes, "I can live with it. Put my name back on the list." It was a great moment. I loved Ed. Ed got cancer and went out to visit him and pray with him. And I said, how are you going to navigate this? And he's a bit arrogant. He goes, I'm going to show the world how a Christian handles cancer. And he did. Led his neighbor to Christ through his cancer journey. A couple years after that, he took 20 acres of scrubland along the Shuswap River in the North Okanagan near Grindrod. And it was terrible land. It flooded every year. He bought that land. He brought in 900 truckloads of fill to raise the property up so it wouldn't flood every year. He built a little 3-hole golf course for his grandkids. He built a guest house first that he lived in, but it was intended to be for missionaries and pastors that needed a break. He built this big, huge pond, stocked it with fish, built a log cabin. He cleaned the trees himself, built it himself. He was a guy that just made stuff happen. Built some outbuildings, and the place was up. He planted 2,500 trees on this. He turned it into a park. It's gorgeous. One day he was doing some maintenance on the outbuildings, backed his dump truck up, put a 2x10 across the back of it. He was repainting the soffits, had his granddaughter on one side, explained to her the principle of a ballast or of a, counterweight. And she stood on one end, he stood on the other, and they painted. And he's got like a foot left to go at the end of the building. And his wife, Louise, calls and said, Ed, I forget what the granddaughter's name was, lunch is ready. And Ed goes, sweetheart, you go. I'm just going to finish this last bit. And she goes, well, what about the board, the counterbalance thing? And he goes, got it. Thank you for reminding me. I'm good. And so he kind of stretches his legs apart a little bit. So he's reaching out, and he's got like 3 inches left. And he just pushes a little bit more, and the board flipped. He was 6 feet off the ground, and he was 6 feet tall. And he didn't have time to duck his head. It happened so fast. And he broke his neck. C4. He didn't come for lunch. His wife got frustrated. She came out to share her opinion on the situation, and she saw him laying there. And she went up to him and she said, are you okay? He goes, I can't move. Call 911. The ambulance came. They took him down to Kelowna. They put him in a striker frame. He couldn't move his neck. They called me. I drove there as fast as I could. I got there. It was about 6 o'clock. The accident happened at noon. And I didn't know what to do. He was alone. His wife had gone to get some food. I walked in. His eyes were closed. He was tanned. It was the Okanagan, late August, and he was rugged and strong, even though he was 72 years old. And then he realized somebody was in the room, and he goes, who's here? He couldn't turn his head because he's in a striker frame. And I said, Ed, it's Ian. And he goes, thanks for coming. He goes, come here, get over. You can touch me. I'm not going, I'm okay. Bit broken, but I'm okay. And he goes, put your face in front of mine. So I kind of leaned over, and then he smiled at me and he goes, I think I really did it this time. I can't move a thing. I don't know what I said. Whatever pastors say in a moment like that. And I prayed. They air vac'd him to Vancouver for surgery. He went into the GF Stong Rehabilitation Center. And about 10 days after this, my wife and I got in the car and we drove out to Vancouver to spend some time with him and Louise. And I walked into the center, wasn't in his room, and they said he's in the rec area. And I walked over there, and he was in a wheelchair, and he was strapped in around his chest because he would just fall out. And I got there, and I looked at him, and I go, what do you got? And he goes, I got this. And he said, pray that I get this. I want to be able to feed myself. I know I'm a quad for the rest of my life, but could you pray that I get my hands back? And the Lord gave him his hands back. And he was able to hold a drink. He was able to put with Velcro, a fork and a knife and a spoon and eat his food. But he spent the last 20 years of his life in a wheelchair. And I remember we're having a conversation. I go, how are you going to navigate this? He goes, remember what I said when I got cancer? And I said, yeah. He goes, what did I say? I said, you're going to show the world how a Christian handles cancer. And he goes, yeah. He goes, I'm going to show the world how a Christian handles a wheelchair. Took my breath away. About 6 months later, he was back in Inderby. He came to church, got a vehicle that could transport himself with his wife's help. And he preached with me. We preached on Jesus calming the storm. And I'd preach, and then Ed would illustrate from his life. And I vividly remember I remember saying to him, Ed, it's been said that we can live 40 days without food, 8 days without water, 4 minutes without air, 4 seconds without hope. I said, what's your hope? And he kind of wheeled his chair a little closer to the edge. And he said, my Bible tells me that one day I will stand in the presence of Jesus. Doesn't say I'll sit. Such a beautiful spirit. I said to him, Ed, you tell me, because he had told me this, that you've not had a moment of deep depression since the injury. He wouldn't call it an accident. He called it an injury because there's no accidents with God. He either willed it to happen, and that's hard to get my head around, or he allowed it to happen for greater purposes. I can kind of get there. But he said, I said, you say you've had no depression since your injury. How? And he said this to us. He said, realistically, if this had happened when I was young, it probably would have been a way tougher journey for me. I probably would have really struggled. But I've had the last 50 years to get to know Jesus. And I've pretty much tried to give him the first hour of the day for those 50 years to read and pray and reflect. And in this time, I've come to realize that he's a good God. And he's strong, and I can do all things through Jesus who gives me strength. Why do we need to cultivate a relationship with God where we choose to be joyful, we choose to be non-anxious and to pray about everything, where we choose to think the right thoughts, where we choose to learn to be content in every situation, where we choose to believe that we can do all things, not just most things, through Jesus who strengthens us? Why does it matter? Because life has a way of getting our attention, often unexpectedly, often with little preparation. But it's in learning to walk with Jesus that we find courage, capacity, resiliency, and even measures of hope and peace. Kathy, you said that your grandmother taught you, for this we need Jesus. You prayed it beautifully for us. Thank you. I want to add to your phrase 7 words that a lady gave me once at a really difficult season of my life. She wrote it in a card, and I've never forgotten it. And she said, but for this time, we have Jesus. But for this time, we have Jesus. Let's pray together. What does your this time look like today? What is your this for where you need Jesus? He is with us, and he is for us. He sees, he knows, he cares. Our faith may be frail and fragile, but it's not the amount of faith we have, church, that matters. It's the object of our faith. And I invite you, even maybe today, take your hands and just put them on your lap open and say, Lord, for this time, I need you. Give me courage, give me peace, give me strength, give me hope. Keep me from grumbling. Keep me from searching for contentment in all the wrong places. Teach me to trust you for all things. But for this time, we have Jesus.